They say that even if just 1% of orangutans were lost every year, it would lead to their extinction. So a century ago, there were about 230,000 living in the wild. Now it is dramatically lower.
Georgina, can we please have your most interesting orangutan facts?
So they always build a nest to sleep in. They like to be comfy, but they do this every night. So they spend 10 minutes every night building a new nest, and they weave branches together. They use smaller branches as a mattress. And if it rains, they can build a little canopy. And some have been filmed using leaves to make gloves when they're handling like prickly thorns or fruit.
Really good facts. Thank you so much. Now, we're talking about orangutans today because they are endangered. A new study says they're even more at risk because of extreme weather. So let's go back a little bit. Where do they live and what are their habitats like?
So there are three species of orangutan, and they do look a bit different. There's the Bornean, the Sumatran, and the Tapanuli. That's the most endangered. But as you might imagine from their names, they live on islands, Borneo and Sumatra in Malaysia and Indonesia. They live mostly in the trees. They're the heaviest tree-dwelling animal. The habitat they love, and the one we think of, is the rainforest, jungle, or lowland swamps. So they live in this quite lush, dense canopy, very green, moving between those trees. And they live in about 40 different groups on those islands. And that's quite important because as we're going to talk about, there are lots of threats to these animals, and their habitats are sort of being chopped up and put into silos. And so those 40 different communities of orangutans are getting more and more isolated over time, which is another risk to them.
I know that Indonesia and Malaysia produce a lot of the world's palm oil, so is that affecting them as well?
Absolutely. So I think this is probably the biggest and probably the most upsetting threat, I think, to the orangutans. Almost anywhere in the world, if you looked around your home, spend like 2, 3, 4 minutes looking around where you live, you're probably going to find something that has palm oil in it. There's two types of palm oil, but it's made from a fruit that grows on different palm trees. But it is found in half of packaged goods in supermarkets. So lots of like bread, cake, biscuit, toothpaste, lipstick, lots of cosmetics. Partly because it's this really stable product, so it has quite a long shelf life. So it's put in products to make them last longer, basically. But the problem is, as we've made more and more palm oil and used it more en masse, obviously there's higher demand for the palm oil. And it's mostly found in Sumatra and Borneo. And so it's created huge demand for that palm oil. So huge amounts of forest are being cleared to grow the trees. And they also drain some swamps, burn land to prepare it for planting the trees. But that is exactly where all of these orangutans live, more or less. And I don't know if you remember, but in 2019, there was a David Attenborough documentary about climate change. And it had this really viral moment about orangutans. And I watched it and it really hit me. It was really upsetting, actually. And it showed an orangutan in a habitat where there were bulldozers chopping down trees. And the orangutan could see what was happening and was essentially fighting with the bulldozer and was climbing on top of the machine. You knew that the orangutan understood that its home was being destroyed.
Clearly, palm oil is one of the biggest factors, but there's others as well, aren't there?
So mining is a big problem. Other types of agriculture, logging. So at the moment, there's gold mine expansion in Indonesia, threatening the Tapanuli orangutan, which is the most endangered one. And we know that gold prices are really high at the moment. They have been for a couple of years. And so naturally, some companies and communities want to make more money from that. So they're building roads through parts of the jungle in Sumatra to try and open a new open cast gold mine. There's other threats, hydropower expansion, and also logging to produce paper and pulp. And that is all essentially the same issue, which is chopping down forest where the orangutans live. But I was also looking into this, and I was really shocked to see that some orangutans are also hunted for legal trafficking. So some young orangutans are captured for this illegal pet trade, and they actually usually kill the mother because they understand that the mother will try and follow the baby, and then those animals are sold illegally. And there are some threats from human interactions. So sometimes, because their home is essentially shrinking, the orangutans will go onto farmland to look for food or go into communities, and they're perceived as dangerous. So sometimes they can be killed.
When we talk about endangered, can we be more specific? So what are their numbers like now?
It's really stark. So a century ago, there were about 230,000 living in the wild. Now it is dramatically lower. So there's around 120,000 Bornean orangutans, 14,000 Sumatran, and then the Tapanuli, which actually was only discovered to be a separate species about 10 years ago. There's only about 800 of them in the wild. And on average, every year, 2 or 3,000 orangutans are killed. So it's really, really stark numbers and a really very, very concerning future for them. They say that even if just 1% of orangutans were lost every year, it would lead to their extinction, partly because they breed so infrequently. So just 7 to 8 years is when an orangutan will have a baby.
So that new study that we mentioned has also found that extreme weather can be a threat to orangutans as well. So what does that show us?
So this is another really sad story. I think this whole story today is actually, it's quite a depressing one and upsetting, but I think it's important to talk about it. And this threat from climate change just shows again how these different risks can compound. So last November, there was a cyclone that hit South Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia. It killed about 1,000 people. There were 4 days of extreme rainfall, landslides linked to the rainfall. But scientists also discovered that that weather killed about 58 of the Tapanuli orangutans, those really, really threatened ones. And that is actually about 7% of their total population. So it's pushed them closer to extinction. The storm was considered sort of anomalous. So it hasn't been linked very directly to climate change, but we know that climate change means that that area of the world will see more intense rainfall, more storms in the future.
There are so many threats and dangers, but there is some work being done to help, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been known for a long time, but for example, that orangutans are threatened and lots of these other species. There's a lot of conservation work for orangutans in Malaysia and Indonesia. A lot of funding actually goes towards them. There's a lot of charities that are set up to protect them. Some of that is about simply protecting their habitat, so trying to create protected zones of the forest that can't be logged or mining can't happen there. There's also projects to increase, protect them, the like sort of breeding programs to protect their genetic diversity in the future. But there's also work on a kind of very big global political scale. So there's programs where countries like Indonesia, which have some of this really valuable, really rare rainforest, could be paid by other countries to not chop down the forest, basically. It sounds very simple. But, some of these economies are emerging economies. They're not wealthy nations, and they want to use the resources they have, like the rainforest. So one of these ideas is that why don't richer nations pay some of these poorer nations to keep the forest standing? And the idea is then if you can protect that habitat, then you're protecting the animals living in them, for example, the orangutans.
Georgina, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've heard about the threats, but we've also heard that there is a little bit of hope there. So we spoke to someone who is working in conservation.
So at Mighty Earth, we are environmental advocates. We create the conditions in order to stop deforestation and promote rainforest conservation. So there are others who are on the ground who are helping to rescue orangutans, who are helping to release them once they're rescued. We work with those groups. We work with local and indigenous communities. So this is an all hands on deck moment. It means that conservation measures that are used with Bornean orangutans or Sumatran orangutans are not enough. Like doing the best practice in those ecosystems is not enough in the Batang Turo ecosystem, the only home of the Tapanuli orangutan. We can't allow this wonderful great ape, one of our closest relatives in the animal kingdom, to be wiped from the face of the earth. So how do we do that? I mean, I think first there has to be just a stop on any infrastructure development. So that's the dam or the mine happening in the Tapanuli orangutan habitat. Like we just need to pause. The mine is expanding for gold. A lot of that gold will be put in vaults somewhere. We need to pause and really try to understand what the impacts are and work with international conservation scientists to figure out what do we do here. We need communities to be paid for protecting orangutan habitat. We need the government, we need local communities to all treat this with the seriousness that it demands if we're going to protect the species.
Lots of climate stories feel like doom and gloom, and we could all do with a bit of hope and a bit of good news. So I really wanted to read you a comment from my episode on mangroves and how scientists have been tracking their recovery from space. One comment said, "Thank you for giving mangrove forests some love. Mangroves are some of the most productive places on Earth. They are actually incredible habitats. They protect coastlines from storms and store loads of carbon. So if you're after a quick pick-me-up, you can watch that on YouTube or listen wherever you get your podcasts." For now, I'm Emma Louise, and this is What in the World from the BBC World Service.